They called him a thief, a troublemaker, a kid with no future. But on the night Ozzy Osbourne first held a microphone he'd stolen from a music shop just hours before, something happened that nobody expected. Not his father, not the audience, not even Ozzy himself. It was November 12, 1965, in Birmingham, England. The city was still scarred from World War II bombings, its streets lined with rubble and half-demolished buildings. In the working-class neighborhood of Aston, where rows of identical brick houses pressed against each other like prisoners, the Osbourne family lived at 14 Lodge Road, in a tiny two-bedroom house with no indoor bathroom. John Michael Osbourne, not yet known as Ozzy, was 17 years old. He shared a bedroom with his 5 siblings. His father, Jack, worked nights at the GEC factory, making car parts for barely enough to feed the family. His mother, Lillian, worked days at a car components factory. They were exhausted, poor, and running out of hope that any of their children would escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped generations before them. John had already proven to be their biggest disappointment. He dropped out of school at 15, unable to read properly due to undiagnosed dyslexia. His teachers had called him stupid, lazy, worthless. His classmates, including a boy named Tony Iommi, had bullied him relentlessly. He'd bounced from job to job: construction laborer, toolmaker's apprentice, slaughterhouse worker, plumber's assistant. He couldn't hold any of them. Then came the crime. First, small things: shoplifting, breaking into cars. Then, bigger things. At 17, he'd been caught breaking into a clothing store and sentenced to 6 weeks at Winson Green Prison. His father had refused to pay the fine, hoping prison would teach his son a lesson. It hadn't. John had come out with homemade tattoos on his knuckles, OZZY on his left hand, done with a sewing needle and graphite, and a burning determination to never go back to a normal job. But there was one thing John could do that nobody expected. He could sing. Not just sing, he could reach notes that seemed impossible for someone who looked so ordinary. He could hold a crowd's attention with nothing but his voice. He'd discovered this singing along to Beatles records in his cramped bedroom, copying every inflection, every emotion in their voices. The problem was, singing required equipment. Microphones, amplifiers, speakers, things that cost money the Osbourne family didn't have. John had tried to save up from various jobs, but money slipped through his fingers as fast as he earned it. His father had made it clear there would be no money for silly music dreams. So, on that gray November morning, John made a decision that would change everything. He walked into Ringway Music Shop on Broad Street, a store he'd visited dozens of times, pressing his face against the window like a hungry child at a bakery. The shop owner, Mr. Hendricks, knew John by sight and watched him carefully. John had never stolen from this shop before. It felt too personal, too close to his dream. But today, desperation overrode respect. John waited until Mr. Hendricks moved to the back room to help another customer. His heart hammering, palms sweating, John grabbed a Shure microphone, not the best model but good enough, and stuffed it inside his coat. He walked out as casually as he could manage, certain that every person on the street could hear his guilty heartbeat. He made it 3 blocks before the terror hit him. What had he done? His father would kill him. If he got caught, he'd go back to prison. But when he pulled the microphone out and held it in his hands, feeling its weight, something else happened. For the first time in his life, John Osbourne felt like he was holding his future. That afternoon, his friend and aspiring musician, Geezer Butler, knocked on the door of 14 Lodge Road. Geezer, whose real name was Terry, had been trying to form a band and had heard through mutual friends that John could sing. "There's an open mic night at the Crown tonight," Geezer said. "Come audition. If you're any good, you're in." John's mother, Lillian, overheard the conversation. She'd always been softer on her son than his father was, secretly believing that John had something special inside him, even if she couldn't articulate what. "Go on then," she said quietly, "but be back before your father gets home from work." The Crown was a dingy pub in Aston, The kind of place where factory workers went to forget their lives for a few hours. The stage was just a raised corner of the room with battered equipment and a single spotlight that flickered. The open mic night attracted wannabe musicians, drunks who thought they could sing, and the occasional genuinely talented performer. John arrived at 7 p.m., the stolen microphone hidden in a bag. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold it. He'd never performed in front of anyone except his bedroom mirror. He had no formal training, no experience, no idea what he was doing. The only thing he had was a desperate need to prove that he was more than what everyone said he was. Geezer introduced him to the makeshift band, a guitarist named Paul, a bassist named Mick, and a drummer who went by Sticks because no one could remember his real name. They looked at John skeptically. He was small, pale, with bad teeth and clothes that had seen better days. He didn't look like a singer. He looked like exactly what he was, a poor kid from Aston with no prospects. "What do you want to sing?" Paul asked, adjusting his guitar strap. "She Loves You," John said. "The Beatles." The band exchanged glances. Half the acts that night had done Beatles covers. It was safe, popular, overdone. But it was also John's favorite song, the one that had made him want to be a musician in the first place. When he'd first heard it at 15, something had clicked inside him. Music could be an escape. Music could be a future. There were 6 acts before John's turn. He watched them all, growing more terrified with each performance. Some were decent, others were terrible and got booed off stage. The crowd was ruthless, drunk, and looking for entertainment one way or another. If you were good, they loved you. If you were bad, they destroyed you. At 8:47 p.m., the pub owner, a massive man named Frank, called out, "Next up, some kid from down the road, John something, get up here." John's legs felt like they'd turned to water. Geezer gave him a shove. "Go on, mate, you've got this." John walked to the stage, every eye in the pub on him. The stolen microphone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He plugged it into the PA system, his hands shaking so badly the connector kept slipping. Someone in the crowd laughed. Someone else yelled, "Hurry up, we haven't got all night." The band started the opening riff of "She Loves You." It was rough, not quite in tune, but recognizable. This was the moment. John had 10 seconds before he needed to start singing. 10 seconds to change his life or confirm everything everyone had ever said about him. He opened his mouth and nothing came out. The band kept playing, but John was frozen. His throat had closed up. His mind had gone blank. The crowd started to murmur. Someone laughed. Someone else yelled, "Get off the stage, you tosser." Then John saw his father. Jack Osbourne had just walked into the pub, still wearing his factory overalls, his face black with grease. He'd gotten off work early. He'd come looking for his son because Lillian had accidentally mentioned where John had gone. And now Jack stood in the back of the pub, arms crossed, staring at his son with an expression that mixed disappointment, anger, and something else John couldn't quite read. Everything John had ever wanted to prove to his father crystallized in that moment. He wasn't useless. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a waste of space. He was something. He had to be something. John closed his eyes, gripped the stolen microphone, and sang. What came out wasn't just singing. It was raw emotion transformed into sound. It was every bit of pain, rejection, poverty, and desperation he'd ever felt channeled through his vocal cords. His voice started rough, but grew stronger with every word. He wasn't trying to copy the Beatles anymore. He was making the song his own. The crowd went silent. This skinny, pale kid who looked like he should be invisible was commanding the room. His voice had a quality that was impossible to ignore, a vulnerability mixed with power, a yearning that everyone in that working-class pub understood. He was singing about love, but really he was singing about escape, about hope, about refusing to accept the life you were born into. By the second verse, people had stopped drinking to listen. By the bridge, some were swaying. When he hit the final chorus, holding that last note longer and stronger than the Beatles ever had, the entire pub erupted. The applause was deafening. People were standing, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. They weren't just applauding the performance. They were applauding one of their own, proving that maybe, just maybe, dreams weren't only for other people. John opened his eyes, stunned. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Then he saw his father pushing through the crowd toward the stage. John's stomach dropped. Here it came, the yelling, the humiliation, being dragged out of the pub by his ear like a child. But when Jack reached the stage, he didn't yell. He stood there. This man who'd worked himself to exhaustion his entire life, who'd never had a chance at anything better, staring at his son like he was seeing him for the first time. "Where'd you get the microphone?" Jack asked, his voice rough. John's heart sank. He couldn't lie. "I stole it. From Ringway Music." The pub had gone quiet again, but for a different reason. Everyone waited to see what would happen. Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone, most of all John. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled wad of bills, his week's wages. He counted out money and handed it to John. "Tomorrow morning," Jack said, "you take this to Mr. Hendricks. You pay for that microphone, you apologize, and you ask him if you can work in the shop to make up the difference." John stared at the money, unable to speak. "But tonight," Jack continued, his voice getting stronger, "tonight you proved something. You've got talent, son, real talent. I've never heard anything like that in my life." Tears welled up in John's eyes. His father had never said anything like that to him before. "I can't give you much," Jack said. "Your mother and I were just scraping by. But I've been saving a bit here and there." He pulled out another small bundle of bills. "It's not a lot, but it's enough for a down payment on proper equipment. You're going to need more than a stolen microphone if you're serious about this." The crowd burst into applause again, this time for Jack as much as for John. Geezer bounded onto the stage. "He's in the band! He's absolutely in the band!" That night changed everything. True to his word, John went to Ringway Music the next morning, returned the microphone, paid for it with his father's money, and apologized to Mr. Hendricks. The shop owner, moved by the boy's honesty and his father's sacrifice, not only forgave him, but gave him a part-time job and a small discount on future purchases. With his father's help, John bought a proper PA system on credit. He and Geezer formed a band, then another, then another. They were terrible at first, playing pubs and small venues for nothing but drink tickets. But John, who started calling himself Ozzy, embracing the nickname and the knuckle tattoos, kept improving. His voice, that instrument he'd been born with, became his weapon. 2 years later, in 1967, Geezer formed a new band and asked Ozzy to join. Along with Tony Iommi, the same kid who'd bullied Ozzy in school, and drummer Bill Ward, they formed what would eventually become Black Sabbath. Ozzy never forgot that first performance. Years later, when he was rich and famous, playing arenas instead of pubs, he would tell interviewers about the stolen microphone and his father's unexpected support. "My dad was the first person to believe in me," he'd say, "not because I asked him to, not because I deserved it, but because I finally showed him I was willing to work for something." Jack Osbourne died in 1977, before he could see his son become one of the biggest rock stars in the world. But he lived long enough to see Ozzy's first album go gold. On the album's liner notes, Ozzy had written a simple dedication, "To my dad, who gave me a chance when no one else would." The story of that first performance became legendary in Birmingham. The Crown eventually closed down in the 1980s, but a plaque was placed on the building commemorating it as the place where Ozzy Osbourne first performed. When Ozzy returned to Birmingham for concerts, he would sometimes drive by Lodge Road and the Crown, remembering the terrified 17-year-old with a stolen microphone and impossible dreams. In interviews throughout his career, Ozzy was asked what made him different from other musicians. His answer was always the same: "I was desperate. I had nothing to lose. When you've got nothing, you're willing to risk everything." That microphone I stole, it wasn't just a microphone. It was my ticket out. But it wasn't just the microphone. It was his father seeing beyond the theft to the dream underneath. It was a working-class pub giving a nobody kid a chance. It was the moment when John Osbourne stopped being the family disappointment and started becoming Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness. That stolen microphone hung in Ozzy's home studio for decades, a reminder of where he came from and what it took to get out. When he died in 2025, it was donated to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, displayed with a simple placard, the microphone that started it all. Stolen from a Birmingham music shop in 1965, paid for the next day, changed music history forever. Because sometimes the difference between a thief and a legend is just one moment of desperate courage and one person willing to believe in you when everyone else has given up.